Yeah, welcome back. Sorry about that. That was, hold on. Um, yeah, is chat operational? Live chat, all messages are visible. There we go. All right, got that sorted for Tuesday. Yeah, I just saw my doggo. I just saw my doggo. So yeah, sorry for that. And I might either re-record or download them and try to splice them together. I've never actually gotten around to learning how to do any editing. Can you tell? But yeah, we'll see how this works out. There's not a lot left on this, and I sort of have I've got study on to get done. It's my birthday on Tuesday, so Tuesday is a washout, and the White Hattie Music Festival on Saturday. So I've got a bunch of people coming down from Christchurch, and yeah, party weekend. So yeah, it's sort of on my brain to get more work done today if I can. With that in mind, watch me procrastinate. Alright, so before we had been there 12 hours, 3 of us made the first reconnaissance of the canyon. I will refer to my notes for the impression that it made on us. Yeah, I haven't found a good place to have my head while I do this yet, really. So professional. It's what YouTube's about, right? Ed, Game, and I explored the Pongo in the small canoe. Our little craft was tossed about like a feather by the whirlpools and eddies, but was kept from being dashed against the walls by its very lightness. The direction of the main current in the Pongo is not distinguishable at first, appearing to flow up as well as downstream. Being but 30 or 40 yards wide, the water must be tremendously deep, as the river above and below is 10 times this width. On glancing through my notes, I see that in another place I assigned to this mighty gorge a height of 1,000 feet, which was the best estimate I could make. From above, it appeared deeper still, but owing to its narrowness, I should not care to trust to that impression. The main difficulty in the Pongo was the manoeuvring of the corners. The current in the centre was of course downstream and very strong, but those at the sides were upstream and very nearly as swift. The latter must have been formed by the terrific backwash resulting from the pressure of the mainstream against the solid resistance of the walls of the ravine, where it was forced to turn abrupt corners by the sharp zigzagging of the canyon. By careful manipulation, these currents carry a canoe upstream with great rapidity, but the moment a corner is reached, the trouble starts. To get round that corner and reach the safety of the next stretch of unbroken water requires great care and an experienced hand. Then again, there are the whirlpools. Of these there are many, with one standing out beyond all the rest. This latter may even be compared to the whirlpool rapids below Niagara Falls. I shall refer to it in detail below. Altogether, then, the Pongo de Manseriche presents a very stiff problem in navigation. The lighter the craft, the easier the task, for the vortices of the pools may be negotiated by swift strokes, which would be wholly impossible in a canoe of the build of the Exploradora, which weighed several tons. The great whirlpool fills the whole canyon at one of its widest points. It must be 50 yards across. I have viewed it from every direction except from underneath, and consider it to be worthy of some attention before passing on through the ravine to the country beyond, our promised land. On our first excursion, we made no effort to circumvent it. 2 or 3 narrow escapes from capsizing in the lower reaches warned us of the dangers of the canyon at certain states of the water. We penetrated to within a short distance of the great pool, but the sight of the whirling mass of water revolving around the great chasm, which seemed capable of sucking a whole steamer into the unfathomable depths, was enough to damp our ardour for the moment. The first glimpse of a dangerous undertaking is, I think, always the worst. It is only when you have taken a second and a third look at the enemy, and carefully weighed up the chances, thus depriving him of his strongest weapon, surprise, that you are capable of deciding whether or no you will attack him. And so it was with us. Our first sight of that prodigious obstacle to our progress was singularly unproductive of a desire to paddle to within reach of its grasp. we retired to think it over. Next day, a journey up the hill which forms the northern side of the canyon was undertaken, with the object of finding a place. Oh, God. Yeah, you. The joys of the. There's a chat on YouTube. Use that. Oh, you're not even watching this one now. Don't tell me you're watching the combo one. We'll get there. Grr. Excuse me, this is... Alright, so pros and cons. At least this is getting done, for fuck's sake. Need to simmer down now. I'm all wound up. Whirlpool, we're on the whirlpool. Next day, a journey up the hill, which forms the northern side of the canyon, was undertaken, with the object of finding a place where we could scramble down to take a close look at the pool from above. We succeeded. We found a narrow cleft in the precipitous wall of rock, and clambered down to within 20 or 30 feet of the highest point to which the water was rising. The significance of this remark lies in the fact that the water was at this point continually heaving up and falling away, as though the whirlpool concealed some gigantic pair of lungs, with a rise and fall of at least 20 feet. This motion was only noticeable when the pongo was very full. Under such conditions, there would have been no chance whatever of making the passage. So there we stood, gazing straight down into that internal vortex, wondering whether we should ever see the country that lay beyond. We could do nothing, nor even would we be able to do anything. We were hopelessly dependent on nature to help us out. We were awakened from our reverie by a practical demonstration of the fate that would overtake man, beast, boat, or any other floating thing that might be drawn within the grasp of that hungry maw, whose lip nothing can escape. Shooting down the canyon came a giant guayacan, a near relative of the true hardwood trees which will not float. It must have stood 150 feet before the water. It had eaten away the bank wherein it was rooted, and it had toppled over like a ninepin, to be swept, perhaps hundreds of miles, and finally to be caught in the boulders and to form yet another snag. On it came with tremendous momentum, almost enough to carry it past the fatal spot, but not quite, for it was caught and held by the swirling water, and in a moment was careering round the pool, sweeping both sides of the canyon with roots and branches, as if in a vain attempt to save itself. 3 or 4 times it circled, each time a little nearer the center, until at last, with a heave of its great length, it reared its head straight up, revolved in the very center of the pool, and sank from sight. Clean straight down it went, and was swept from the radius of our vision without again breaking the surface. At the end of a week's reconnoitering, and waiting for better conditions, luck favored us. We had no information concerning the pongo on which to go, of course, for unless the inhabitants of Borja made some expeditions through it into Huambisa country, for which we were ourselves heading, it is doubtful whether white men had ever steered a canoe from east to west through that stretch of water before. As for the downstream passage, history records 2 occasions at least on which it was attempted. The first white man to get through was D. Juan Salines, a Jesuit priest of Ecuador, who descended to Santiago from the vicinity of Cuenca and Loja in 1557, and who described the canyon as a frightful series of torrents and whirlpools. More than 300 years later, in 1870, a certain Wertherman came down from the Marañón with a party on 3 rafts. He, too, shot the Pongo de Manseriche. His impression of the canyon was a huge rent in the Andes, with precipitous sides 2,000 feet high, seeming to close in at the top. It's from the Encyclopedia Britannica. Oh no, wait. Sorry, it's in brackets. He does do some weird brackets. The Encyclopedia Britannica speaks of his trip as one of the most daring deeds of exploration ever known in South America. Without wishing to detract from the value of Mr. Wertherman's report, I must confess that the cliffs did not strike me as being quite so high, nor did I notice any tendency to close in at the top. Perhaps he had more time at his disposal than I had. There was, of course, a certain amount of more or less vague information to be picked up from the Aguarunas, but its practical value, as may be imagined, was very small. We were left to our own devices. On the 7th day, the water had fallen considerably, so it was decided to send our advance guard through the canyon in the light canoe, a 24-footer, with 10 days' rations to get into touch with the Antipas, who might supply us with fresh fruit and vegetables and help us to do what we could never have done by ourselves, namely, paddle the heavy Exploradora with all our stores through and beyond the Pongo. So Game and I set off on the 6th of September with a plan for passing the whirlpool, which was the result of our several reconnaissances. Working hard all day, we covered the 3 miles of water between Borja and the center of the Pongo where the pool is. In the late afternoon, we approached it. To our way of thinking, there was only one solution to the problem of passing that spot, even when the water was reasonably low as it was that day. We approached cautiously, clinging to the northern side of the ravine. To make the last and the worst corner before the pool, we had to clamber out onto the ledges of rock, which gave a precarious foothold, and ease the canoe around it by means of poles and a rope. At last, we were approaching the rim of the pool itself. Steering carefully into the outer edge of the basin, we let ourselves be carried around the rim, the first stage of the process of being sucked into the chasm of water which stared up at us like some evil eye. Then, as we swung around towards the southern cliff, we had to paddle hard to avoid destruction in the depths of a boiling pot, which was created by the rush of water lashing itself into a toppling wave against some rough boulders at the base of the wall of rock, a pother of foam and currents which spelled certain disaster. Swinging clear, still carried round in the outer race of the whirlpool, we shot within landing distance of a sand pit which lay at the mouth of a small ravine at the very southern edge, forming the only place in the whole length of the Pongo, some 5 to 6 miles, where it is possible to get ashore with safety. I say within landing distance, but it was only thanks to Game's unconquerable spirit that we reached shore. He sprang from the bow into the rushing water well out of his depth, and struggled ashore with the rope. Lodging himself between the rocks, he succeeded in arresting the flight of our canoe as it swung around at the rope's end and dragged her into safety. The presence of sand at such a place is due to the protection of the boulders among which we landed, which keep the small spit behind them safe from the attack of the water. At some time, no doubt, the very force of the current ate away the southern wall, which, its strength undermined, fell into the stream, and so formed the ravine and the miniature strand. At all events, there it was, our salvation. For it should be understood that the only chance we had of making the western mouth of the Pongo was to tackle the whirlpool in the way we did. To creep up under the northern face was out of the question, built as it was of smooth, shining rock which offered no hold of any kind, whereas, once landed on the southern edge, it was possible to make the passage by working upstream from that point under the shelter of a ledge of rock which broke the main force of the current and protected a moderately quiet backwater. Here, then, we camped for the night, an ideal spot. As we shall return later to the same camping ground, I shall leave its description until that time arrives. Next morning, we were up early. Slinking out behind that blessed ledge of rock, we made our way during the same day to the freedom of the open water beyond the canyon, fighting upstream with pole and paddle and rope, dodging from one eddy to another, creeping around corners, pushing and pulling. At this point in my narrative, I cannot help reflecting how fortunate we had been up to that memorable day when we paddled clear of the Pongo. Trouble of a serious nature lay ahead of us, but when one comes to think of it, it was only what we ought to have expected. The plain fact was that we had been far more in luck's way than we knew. Trouble is the common lot of those who go on such foolhardy expeditions as that which we, in the way of all men when wild spirits are gathered together, undertook. We had no right to expect anything else, but we did, that is certain. For when evil days fell upon us, we did not stop to think of all the good fortune we had had, but curse the goddess who had so cruelly forsaken us. On the first day which we passed in the Headhunters' country, one cannot assign it to any civilized government. Things went tolerably well. Progress was slow. However, the river having become difficult to navigate, here its bed was stony and rough, a mass of shingle for the most part. They're horrible sentences. Scattered with shallows and full of cross currents, it no longer gave us a chance of unbroken paddling. We were able to pole a good deal, it is true, but as often as not, the stream was too strong for either method, and we were reduced to pulling our craft over what seemed endless stretches of bad water. Little by little, our feet gave way under the constant soaking and the chafing of the stones and pedals. They swelled and became more tender as each hour passed. Cut to pieces, and finally completely skinned, they became almost unbearable. And yet, there was nothing for it but to push on, for we were not anxious to return to camp with our mission unfulfilled. And so, with the country becoming more difficult every day, we staggered on for a whole long week of misery. There was no game to be had. The woods seemed to have been swept clean of living things. Having taken much longer than we anticipated to make the inhabited zone, our food supplies became lower and lower, until the last tin of café au lait disappeared, and we were left with nothing but salt. All our efforts to discover one single sign of human life, a bit of charcoal among the flotsam of the river, an axe mark on a tree, or any bit of wood that looked as if it might have been touched by human hand, failed with a dismal monotony that bore us down to an indescribably gloomy state of mind. On the 6th or 7th day of that funereal trip, I managed to spot and shoot a capybara, the only living thing we had seen for what seemed years. We salted and smoked it, but its flesh was revolting to me. Even the pangs of hunger could not drive me to eat that beast with any relish. It appeared to have been soaked in some very cheap, rank perfume. One would have imagined that it was a carnivorous beast, so pungent was its meat. But it kept us alive somehow for 3 days. Finally, we simply could not stand up at all, either in the canoe or out of it. There was but one mode of progress left: crawling. So we crawled, in turns. One of us would hook the rope end round his waist and, having scrambled up the bank, would crawl along on hands and knees, dragging the canoe painfully upstream, ever so slowly, like some poor old broken-down drag horse on the towpath of the canal, while the other held it off the rocks with a pole. Unable to touch earth with the soles of our feet, we made wretched progress. Game's tough spirit bore him up through it all, however, until on the afternoon of the 10th day, we arrived at the beginning of a long straight stretch of water, where we should be able to paddle for several miles without interruption. We sat and gazed upstream as far as the eye could see, where the river made a bend to the right. Turning to each other, each saw what was in the other's mind, the same thought. Almost as one man, we voiced it. If at the end of this stretch there is nothing, we turn about. We had reached the limit of our endurance, worn out by hunger and pain, and worst of all, disappointment. For days we had cursed our luck, but it seemed that it was never destined to change. We were down and out. It was in no optimistic frame of mind then that we set ourselves wearily to paddle what was to be the last 4 miles or so of that attempt, whether it failed or succeeded. There seemed no reason why it should succeed, for the complete absence of a single sign of human life was enough to convince us that no men were to be found within so short a distance. We had not paddled for more than an hour when it came to the commencement of the bend. For fuck's sake. Yes, you both of you have now just fucking messaged me in the middle of a fucking live stream to say, wow, look at your live stream get fucking distracted. Cheers, guys. I look forward to you watching this bit. We were just fucking like, we were on the last fucking page. So yeah, if at the end of this stretch there is nothing, we turn it back. We had reached the limit of our endurance, worn out by hunger and pain, and worst of all, disappointment. For days we had cursed our luck, but it seemed that it was never destined to change. We were down and out. It was in no optimistic frame of mind then that we set ourselves wearily to paddle what was to be the last 4 miles or so of that attempt, whether it failed or succeeded. There seemed no reason why it should succeed, for the complete absence of a single sign of human life was enough to convince us that no men were to be found within so short a distance. We had not paddled for more than an hour when we came to the commencement of the bend. As it gradually unfolded itself to our view, we noticed a sheltered creek on the left bank which had not been visible before. A few strokes more and it was in view. On the hillside above, some 200 yards from the bank, a bright yellow patch among the dark green forest, stood a Hivaro shack. And ha! We have officially met the fucking well, not met, but we've spotted the Headhunters. This is further in the book than I've gotten by far. And yay, we're there. And hi, someone's watching. You can post in the chat to say who you are, if it's someone I know or not. But I'm about to log off this recording because we just got done. TikTok. Let's see, chat. Yeah, live chat. All messages are visible. Not saying hi? Cool. Well, I'm going to love you and leave you. Our next chapter 16 is called Diplomacy, and that is where shit, I think, officially starts to get interesting. Well, that's the bit I bought the book for, and I've gotten that. Yeah, this is the bit we've still got to do. I've gotten more than halfway through the book without any headhunters, and the book is called Headhunters of the Amazon, 7 Years of Exploration and Adventure. So, yeah, we're finally getting to the fucking shit I came here for. Woo! Alright. Love yous and love yous. Bye-bye.